The air in the Sakha Republic of Siberia does not merely get cold, it turns into a physical entity that actively tries to kill you. At -71 degrees Celsius, the moisture in your breath freezes instantly, falling to the snow with a sound the local Yakut people call the whisper of the stars. Elara Hastings, a senior wildlife biologist working for the Northern Taiga Conservation Project, knew this sound intimately. On the afternoon of January 14th, she was 30 miles off the Kolyma Highway, driving a heavily modified Buran snowmobile. Her mission was routine. Retrieve data logs from a remote telemetry station that had stopped transmitting. But out here, routine was a fragile concept. The sun was already dipping below the jagged tree line, casting long, bruised shadows across the snowdrifts. Ilara's heated visor hummed faintly, the only sound aside from the roaring two-stroke engine beneath her. She was about to turn back toward Outpost Charlie when she saw the tracks. They were massive, wide, deep indentations that belonged to an apex predator, but they were overlapping. Amur tigers. Siberian tigers are strictly solitary creatures, yet the impressions in the powder clearly indicated 3 distinct sets of tracks moving together. This was a biological anomaly. Likely 3 subadult brothers, starved and desperate, forced into a deadly coalition by the brutal winter. Ilara stopped the snowmobile, pulling her heavy rifle from its scabbard. The forest was dead silent. Then, an agonized howl shattered the stillness, followed by a chorus of deep, concussive roars that vibrated in Ilara's chest. She shouldn't have gone toward the sound. The prime directive of field biology is observation, not intervention. But the desperation in that howl clawed at her humanity. Gunning the engine, Ilara tore through the dense birch stands, erupting into a wide, snow-choked clearing. The scene before her was a grim painting of natural selection. Backed against the massive, upended roots of a fallen pine was a timber wolf. Her coat was matted with frozen blood, her left hind leg hanging uselessly. Tucked beneath her trembling belly was a single pup, no more than 3 months old, eyes wide with terror. Circling them were 3 Amur tigers. They were magnificent and terrifying, their orange coats muted by the twilight, their breath billowing in massive clouds of steam. They were pacing, coordinating, waiting for the mother wolf to bleed out. They were starving, their ribs visible beneath their thick winter coats. Ilara watched, paralyzed, as the largest tiger lunged. The mother wolf, operating purely on maternal adrenaline, snapped her jaws, tearing a chunk of flesh from the tiger's snout. The big cat recoiled with a deafening roar, but the effort cost the wolf dearly. She collapsed into the snow, chest heaving. It was over. No, Ilara thought, her gloved finger slipping into the trigger guard of her flare gun. Not today. She aimed high into the tree canopy and fired. A blinding, magnesium-red starburst erupted above the clearing, accompanied by a sharp, shrieking whistle. The shadows danced violently. The tigers, unaccustomed to the unnatural light and the explosive sound, scattered backward. Ilara didn't hesitate. She drove the Buran directly between the retreating cats and the dying wolf, the headlights cutting through the red glare. She unholstered her rifle, firing 2 deafening warning shots into the air. The crack of the .30-06 caliber in the frozen air sounded like artillery. The tigers, realizing this loud, unnatural creature was not worth the caloric expenditure, finally turned and vanished into the darkening taiga. Silence crashed back into the clearing, heavier than before. Ilara dismounted, her boots crunching in the snow. The mother wolf tried to bare her teeth, but she was too far gone. Her golden eyes locked onto Ilara's visor. There was no aggression left in them, only a profound, desperate plea. Ilara knelt in the snow, ignoring protocol, and slowly reached out. The mother wolf let out a soft, rattling sigh and rested her heavy head on Ilara's heavily insulated boot. She pushed the shivering pup toward Ilara's hands. By the time Ilara had wrapped the pup in her emergency thermal blanket and hoisted the 90-pound mother onto the snowmobile's cargo sled, the temperature had dropped further. The drive back to Outpost Charlie was a blur of adrenaline and encroaching frostbite. Dr. Kevin Penhaligon, the station chief, and Thomas Bennett, the bush pilot, rushed out of the compound as Ilara's Buran sputtered to a halt. "Ilara, what in God's name did you bring back?" Kevin yelled over the wind, helping her drag the sled into the medical bay. They worked for 3 hours under the harsh fluorescent lights, but the cold and the tiger claws had done their work. The mother wolf's heart gave out just past midnight. However, the pup survived. Elara named him Ash for the dark, smoky coloration of his fur. Over the next 8 months, Elara and Ash became inseparable. He was not a pet. He was a wild creature temporarily confined by circumstance. Elara meticulously trained him, ensuring he maintained his wild instincts, feeding him raw meat and teaching him to fear human structures. In the autumn of 2022, when Ash was a formidable 100-pound yearling, Elara drove him out to the protected reserve in Yakutia, 300 miles from where she had found him. It was the hardest thing she ever had to do. She opened the cage, and Ash stepped out. He looked back at her once, his piercing yellow eyes lingering on her face, before disappearing into the dense evergreen forest. Life at the outpost returned to its harsh, uncompromising rhythm. The story of Elara saving a wolf from tigers became a local legend, a tale traded by fur trappers and truck drivers along the ice road. But nature, Elara knew, did not deal in legends. It only dealt in survival. 3 years later, in February 2025, the taiga called in its debts. Elara was mapping migration routes near the Verkhoyansk range, deep in the absolute wilderness. The weather forecast had predicted clear skies, but in Siberia, the sky is a liar. A freak whiteout blizzard descended with terrifying speed, dropping visibility to 0 and plunging the temperature to an unimaginable -74 degrees Celsius with the wind chill. To make matters worse, her snowmobile hit a hidden ice fissure, snapping the front ski and throwing Elara violently into a snowbank. She heard the sickening crack of her own femur before she felt the pain. Lying in the snow, immobilized, Elara knew the grim reality. She was 15 miles from her base camp. Her radio was smashed in the fall. At this temperature, even with her extreme cold weather gear, she had less than 2 hours before hypothermia would put her to sleep forever. She managed to drag herself under the meager shelter of a rocky overhang, wrapping her broken leg and curling into a tight ball. The cold was a physical weight, crushing her lungs, turning her blood to sludge. An hour passed. She could no longer feel her hands or feet. The shivering stopped the final, fatal sign that her core temperature was plummeting. As her vision began to narrow into a dark tunnel, she heard it, the soft, rhythmic crunch of paws on snow. Elara forced her eyes open. Out of the blinding white vortex stepped a shadow, then another, and another. 6 adult timber wolves materialized from the blizzard, their coats caked in ice, their eyes glowing like pale embers in the gloom. They had caught the scent of blood from her injury. In the brutal winter, a crippled human was easy prey. Elara didn't have the strength to reach for the knife at her belt. She felt a strange, detached peace. She had dedicated her life to these woods. It seemed fitting, if not poetic, that she would be consumed by them. The largest of the wolves, a massive, heavily scarred alpha male, stepped forward, closing the distance. He towered over her, his hot breath washing across her freezing face. He lowered his massive head, his jaws parting to reveal razor-sharp teeth. Elara closed her eyes, waiting for the end. Instead, she felt a rough, wet tongue drag across her frozen cheek. Elara gasped, her eyes flying open. The alpha wolf was staring at her. His left ear was missing a distinct, jagged notch, a scar she recognized instantly. It was a wound he had received from a barbed wire fence at the outpost when he was just a clumsy pup. "Ash?" she whispered, her voice cracking. The great wolf let out a low, rumbling whine that vibrated through the rock. He didn't attack. Instead, he turned and barked a sharp command to the rest of the pack. To Elara's absolute disbelief, the wolves did not tear into her. They advanced and collapsed into the snow around her, forming a tight, impenetrable ring of fur and muscle. Ash stepped over Elara's legs and lay directly across her torso, draping his massive, 130-pound body over her chest. The other wolves pressed in close, their bodies a furnace of 100-degree heat against her freezing gear. They were sharing their thermal mass. They were keeping her alive. Throughout the endless, roaring night of the blizzard, whenever Elara began to drift into the fatal sleep of hypothermia, Ash would nudge her face with his heavy snout, whining until she opened her eyes. He anchored her to the waking world. 14 hours later, the blizzard broke. The morning sun cast a brilliant, blinding light over the taiga. The sound of chopping rotor blades echoed through the valleys. Thomas Bennett's search and rescue helicopter crested the ridge, banking sharply as they spotted the bright orange fabric of Alara's survival suit against the rocks. As the mechanical roar grew closer, the wolves stood up, shaking the heavy snow from their coats. Ash looked down at Alara one final time. He didn't lick her face or seek affection. He simply stood there, an apex predator of the Siberian wilderness, acknowledging an ancient, unspoken debt paid in full. With a flick of his ears, Ash turned and bounded into the deep powder. The rest of the pack followed, vanishing like ghosts into the tree line just as the helicopter touched down. When Dr. Kevin Penhaligon finally reached Alara, hauling her into the warm cabin of the chopper, he looked at the ring of melted snow and wolf tracks surrounding her. "Alara," Kevin said, breathless, his eyes wide with shock. Did they try to attack you?" Alara looked out the frost-covered window of the helicopter toward the endless expanse of the taiga. She could feel the lingering warmth of the wild against her chest. "No, Kevin," Alara whispered, a faint smile cracking her frozen lips. "They were just returning a favor."